Drug addiction has always been a big issue. So, when we come to discussing about going through addiction and coming out of addiction, it's a tough issue to discuss. But then, when we have someone who's been there, done that, come out of it, and continues to shine in life, it's a good opportunity to get the conversation going and understand how is it to be addicted and how easy is it to come out of it, or how hard is it to come out of it. So today we have a guest who is going to talk to us about recovery from addiction and mental illness. His name is Joe Tarastos, and he'll be here shortly. This is Now Tell Us, and I'm your host, Anthony Moirore. So why not join me as we go together to meet our guest today? Here we go. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Anthony.
How are you?
I am well. Glad
Yeah,
to be here.
welcome to Now Tell Us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, we are glad to have you here with us also. And we are looking forward to hearing about this sensitive issue. It's an issue that is interesting to listen to when you have not been there, but is I believe a tough one when someone has been there and is experiencing that and maybe is having a challenge to come out of there. But before we go into that, I would like maybe to know who is Joe.
I was born in 1961. That makes me 62 years old, which I never thought I had this far.
Yeah.
I currently am in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. The organization that I'm with is called Face It Together. And the website is wefaceittogether.org. More on that later. I was born in a very small farming community in South Dakota, which is where I am today.
Mhm.
And the town, I'm fifth generation on both my mom and my dad's side. All four of my grandparents went to school together. Three of them graduated together in a class of nine.
Nice.
And my favorite picture of my parents is my dad, my mom, and my aunt Shirley. My dad is 5 years old. My mom is 4, and Shirley is 3. So I have a very small, tight family. We all come from the same place. So we have learned very much so to get along because we're what we have.
Yeah.
I was in the radio industry in the United States for 35 years as an on-air talent, as a program director, as an operations manager in places like here in Sioux Falls, in Rochester, Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, working in commercial radio and also running a public non-commercial radio network statewide here in South Dakota for 8.5 years. South Dakota is a big place. It is 77,000 square miles, and there's only 900,000 people across that space. We straddle 2 time zones, so it's a fairly big, spread out place with a lot of room in a lot of places.
Yeah.
As far as the addiction goes, you're right. It is a big topic. It's a universal topic. It's one thing that crosses borders, languages, cultures, you name it. It's there. But it is a thing that we do need to talk about, and I think it's getting easier for people to talk about. And I hope so, and I hope things like this help.
Let's hope so.
As we get going.
Yeah.
I certainly never planned on going down the path that I went, and part of it was, I grew up in a small town, and it's where we measure time a little differently. We sometimes we measure time in BC and AD.
Yeah.
I measure time in BC and AC,
Wow.
before cable and after cable.
An
You
interesting.
could, yeah, you could grow up in a small town, and I grew up actually in Minnesota. I was born here, but I grew up in Minnesota,
Okay.
and you could be very knowledgeable in a lot of areas. Well, educated, well traveled, all kinds of things. At the same time, you could be completely naive about other things because they weren't things that were talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, you see behaviors, you see a lot of things going on where you're going, oh, yeah, I was just like anywhere else, where there were people around me whose lives were being severely altered by addiction and mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
But we never talked about it.
Yeah.
We never mentioned it by name. All I knew is when I was a young man, starting college, my head never felt right. I
Mm-hmm.
always felt like I was about a quarter turn off. But we know of ourselves and our we judge everything by what do we know, what have we experienced.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I knew, why would I be different from anyone else? Because I thought everybody would feel, however, I thought everybody was a nervous wreck every day.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was. Why would I think that I was different from anyone else?
Okay.
And when I was in college, I started kind of experimenting with different substances to see if I could get that head straightened out. And
Mm.
I tried everything, anything I could get my hands on, never thinking for a moment that what I was dealing with was mental illness.
Mm.
And it wasn't that I was in denial. I knew nothing about
Mm-hmm.
illness. All I knew is that where I was and that I didn't feel quite right. Many years later, I was doing a morning radio show, and this is kind of a colorful story. We were invited to a small town to raise funds for a high school wrestling program,
Okay.
and so we were invited and not being really told about what it was we were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we show up on a Friday evening, and there in a gymnasium is a man from northern Wisconsin with 10 donkeys. Okay.
10
10 donkeys.
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 Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
It
There
seems
are,
that we are getting somewhere interesting.
oh, well, it's colorful. It all
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
There were 5 of us, and there were 5 teachers from the school. And this gentleman was hired to bring these donkeys in, and we were about to play donkey basketball.
Wow.
If you've never heard of donkey
I've
basketball,
never heard of that.
it is as ridiculous as you might imagine.
Ah.
But I was a young man. I was a team player. It was for charity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, against not listening to the little voice in my head, which I did have a habit of doing back in those days, I said, okay, we'll do this. Immediately when I got on the donkey, I kind of knew that I was not in a good spot,
Mm.
and I was not comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
The man who was hired and had the donkeys had a little riding crop, a little leather like a jockey would use in a horse race.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the donkeys trained so that he could kind of shush them on the rear end this way or the rear end that way, and it would stop or start or turn, and he would kind of direct the game.
Okay.
Well, at some point, I found out later that apparently he had picked me to be comic relief.
Mm.
And what had happened is the electric or the little leather whip went away, and out came an electric cattle prod.
Mm.
And I guess what he did was he hit my donkey in the tail end with this electric cattle prod.
Mm-hmm.
And all I remember is gallop, gallop, buck. And I went flying.
Mm.
And I landed on a very hard tile over concrete multi-purpose school floor, gymnasium floor.
Oh.
My donkey basketball was over for the evening, and I ended up going to the emergency room at the local hospital. And there I received my very first Demerol shot, which is a narcotic painkiller, injected into my backside.
Okay.
And remember, my head was always a quarter turn off. All of
Yeah.
a sudden, I was straight on, and I went, "Where have you been all my life?" Suddenly, the pain was gone in my back. My head was on straight. I felt like $1 million. And I did so for 3 weeks. I felt great for 3 weeks. And then I chased that feeling for the next 20 years. And I became rather quickly addicted to pain medication. And then things kind of spread from there, because while when it stopped working, then I was back to my head was a quarter turn off. So I kept trying other things. And pretty soon there was a lot of marijuana use, there was a lot of alcohol use, and this is carrying on while I am being a very successful radio personality and programmer. It went on for the next 20 years. I never missed a day of work. I always answered the bell. I was very successful at what I did. I was probably one of the top talk radio programmers in America during those times. But all the time on the inside, I was a mess. And I really didn't know why, because I hadn't been diagnosed yet with mental illness. Well, somewhere after I was in the Twin Cities for a couple of years, Minneapolis, St. Paul, a friend of mine said, "You might want to go get checked out." And sure enough, I was diagnosed with severe depression, bipolar disorder 2, anxiety, and adult ADHD. Now, all of this was very much a surprise to me, because I'm just me.
Yeah.
I have nothing to compare it to. So I am prescribed a number of medications at that time, and I took them religiously, but I also kept doing everything else I'd been doing before. Because when you're in the middle of things with mental illness and addiction, you don't always think clearly. You think you are. It's like it's like if you're walking down the sidewalk and you trip and you break your arm, and it's a bad break. The bone is sticking out and there's blood all over the place and it hurts like crazy. You can process in your mind of what you need to do. I need to get to the emergency room now. But what happens when you're used to being a problem solver? You're used to thinking your way through things, but it's your thinker that's not operating correctly. And there you go. All of a sudden I was making choices, thinking, because I'd been a good problem solver. I'd been rewarded for being an excellent problem solver. But I was making decisions based on, false things coming into my head. Let's say, for instance, my body is a car. Okay. And my car isn't running well.
Yeah.
And what's really going on is that there's parts up here in the car that are broken. But I don't realize that the parts are broken in my head. What I think I needed was higher octane gasoline for more power, more speed, then I can get more done. And that seemed at the time like a logical answer. Well, of course it wasn't. It was a very destructive answer. So I'm going on, and my life is getting more and more stressful. I'm not dealing with it well. I know the only thing I can sense is that my life is shortening. I still haven't really have a handle on what's going on, but I knew if I continued doing what I was doing, it wasn't going to end well. So I walked away from this marvelous job. Very unhappy. I thought I would be in the market for another job. So and this is the logic that goes on in your head. It's like, okay, I'll be looking for a job. If I get an offer for a job, I'll probably have to take a drug test. So I better stop smoking marijuana because it would show up on a drug test. I know what we'll do. We'll increase our drinking. Maybe that will do it. And then I went down that path and was just circling down, all the while taking these very powerful medications. and doing exactly what the label on the on the bottle said not to do, which is not to take with other drugs and alcohol.
Mm,
Sometimes my thinking at the time, that wasn't a warning, it was a serving suggestion. That's what I'd kind of, and I can't explain why I thought that way,
mm-hmm,
but that's how I perceived it, and so that's how I went ahead. I moved back to South Dakota. I get the job programming the public radio network. I'm really enjoying it. It was a fun job.
mm-hmm,
So I'm happier. My stress is less, and it's like, okay, well, maybe it's time to quit all these things, all these substances I'm taking, and everything else.
mm,
And I was always someone who could quit anytime I wanted to, and I could quit whenever I wanted to, until I couldn't. And
mm,
there I was going, and I'm trying everything in my world to try to fix it myself. And finally, one day, it was November 17, 2008. It was a Monday morning.
mm-hmm.
Breakfast that day was 4 bottles of beer and 2 OxyContin. And I just said, what am I doing here? This has got to stop.
Yeah.
And in my head, I'm going, I cannot fix this myself. I needed assistance. I needed help in doing so.
Mm-hmm.
So that day, I made a call. I did go to a 30-day inpatient treatment center, which was it was an okay treatment center. It wasn't fabulous, but the people I met, the people who were there with me going through similar situations,
Mm,
were unforgettable. And it's a funny thing in this world. When you're at your lowest and you're at your most confused, for me, people appeared. I'm not sure where they came from. I'm
mm-hmm.
not sure where they went, but they were there when
Yeah.
I needed them.
Mm-hmm.
And after I went through that process and began my recovery, and thankfully it's now been 14 plus years, it's not uncommon for people to say, if I ever get the opportunity to help other people, I'm going to do that, because there were people there for me. And that's how I ended up at Face It Together. And that's why I'm here. I've been here for 6.5 years, and I'm what's called a peer addiction coach. I'm a certified peer addiction coach.
Wonderful.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
what that means is I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not a licensed counselor. I'm a peer. I've been there. And for a lot of people, that's what they're looking for, is someone who has been there, and what did you do, and what advice can you give, and how can you explain things so that they make sense to other people.
Yeah.
Part of me is a cheerleader.
Mm-hmm.
Part of me is someone to be accountable to.
Yeah.
I never judge anyone. I don't give them any of these, but I'm there for support, because it's a funny thing. People will ask you to explain how something feels, or how certain thoughts are going on,
Mm,
and it's very hard to do so. But when you're talking to somebody who has been there, all you need is one of these, and you understand.
yeah. I feel
And
you in there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I've experienced
So,
that.
and
Yeah.
I can go on more about what I do now, but that's kind of where I kind of the path I took, and where I am today.
Okay. Wow. That's quite a story. And now we're gonna touch a few things here and there coming through your story and what you've shared and what we may share with the audience that may help someone out there. Now, first and foremost, we start with the ways of introduction into this. And you told us your story that one was going into ER and coming out addicted. Uh,
Hmm.
I didn't get quite well the story of how you could have access to this while you are in college or in high school, and the way things used to happen back then may not be the same way that things are happening today.
Hmm.
But what was the experience? How did you even know that they exist, and you get your first dose and then you get your constant supply? How does that
Sure.
go?
Well, and here's an interesting thing because we have images, correct? And
Mm-hmm.
we have images of people, that a person who's in addiction is living on the street, and they may be buying drugs on the street. They may be living on the underpass under the highway. Um, we have these images and the stigma of what it's supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm.
What you find out is that addiction takes multiple forms. I never bought a drug on the street.
Mm-hmm.
Mine were, when I started, it was prescription medication because I was really injured and I was really in pain. I ended up having surgery in 2003, and then in 2021 I had major back surgery to fix
Okay.
things that had deteriorated. So the injury was real. And at the beginning, the medication gave me relief from the pain. I found out over time that pain is very complex, and physical pain can come from many different areas. But
Mm-hmm.
I also like the fact of what it did for my head. It made, for a while there, it made me feel in balance.
Mm-hmm.
So I became very skilled at going to doctors and to say, "Doctor, I've got this problem, and I need this pain medication to make it go." And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't totally a falsehood, but after a while, you needed more of the medication to get the same effect, and not understanding, how I was making my pain worse with the undiagnosed mental illness, with the stress that I had put upon myself. It's we look at the world, we think we have it figured out, but there's a lot of things that we don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, for instance, I was a world class worrier.
Mm-hmm.
I worried about everything, and that's in the anxiety part of what I did.
Mm-hmm.
I also uh, cared about people. And so I'm managing people in radio stations, and I care about them, and I want them to do well, and I want them to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, well, I can do that by trying to catch problems before they happen.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I could do that
Yeah.
if it was something I had control over. But I had not yet even considered, this is that naivete again, is that some things you have control over and some things you don't. Now
Mm.
that's not a hard concept to understand, but it never entered my mind until 14 years ago.
Mm.
And
Now, yeah, go ahead.
and well, um, so my story is a story.
Mm-hmm.
Alcohol is legal to buy.
Yeah.
Marijuana, it was not hard to get. In many places in the U.S. and in many places in the world, it's now becoming legal to have. It's not in South Dakota,
Mm.
but we all know kind of where things are going there. Um, all the time, I wasn't trying to be a bad guy or a
Mm-hmm.
criminal or shirk responsibility. I've been married for 35 years. I have a 29-year-old daughter.
Wow.
I was just trying to have my head feel right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like trying to solve a problem that you don't understand where the problem is based. And it wasn't until I got an education about what was going on and why, that all of a sudden I'm going, oh, I never thought of those things. I thought about it differently, and my perception was not accurate.
Mm.
So I was solving a problem, or trying to eliminate a cause which didn't exist, yet I had a cause that did exist that I did not recognize.
Mm. Now, as you are going through all that you are going through, there is a common phrase where people say that birds of a feather flock together. Was that
Hmm.
was that a case any time that you found yourself with people who are going through the same things that you are going through?
Oh, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things that you learn about this is how incredibly common all of this is.
Mm.
We have our again preconceptions about who somebody who is suffering from mental illness and somebody who is suffering with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
what they look like, how they got there, everything else. Well, in the United States, about 1 in 10 have a problem, and 1 in 4 are either directly or indirectly affected by the addiction. Family members, our loved ones, things like, the people in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So number one, it's incredibly common. So you have a 1 in 10 cross section of you have everything in there from homeless people to CEOs and everyone else. And that, you really can't tell by looking at someone if to find out what's going on. And that's what makes it sometimes hard, because in our case, of course, we have to have somebody who, for one reason or another, comes to us. And sometimes they're here because the court says they have to be somewhere. Sometimes they have been convinced by family members that you need to try something. We have people who have tried everything on the planet and it hasn't worked for them. So they're trying what we do, because what we do is kind of different.
Mm-hmm.
And and does everybody walk out happy and a smile on their face? No. But a lot of them do. And it's one of the things that sorry there. I've discovered is, it's people's understanding of addiction is formed by television shows and dramas, and so you can just imagine that there's accuracy and a lot of inaccuracy going on.
Mm-hmm.
In a medical situation, we know that that not all medical problems are created equal. If
Yeah.
you have a cold, you don't go to the intensive care unit.
Mm-hmm.
You go to your primary care physician,
Yeah.
and probably it's just rest and time.
Mm-hmm.
Addiction, we know, we think, when we think of addiction, most people will go, okay, you're an alcoholic, which it's it's a negative word. I don't really like it. And you have to go to treatment, in quotes, which is what? Well, 30 days away somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And some people need that. And some centers are better than others, to be sure. Some people, though, are not that far off. That's what I'm finding. That certainly substances are causing real problems in their lives, themselves, their relationships, their jobs, everything else, but that they aren't that far off. And there are some key things that I can help with as a coach from the things that I've learned, that while everybody's situation is unique in its own way, there are a lot of commonalities.
Mm-hmm.
And at a time when people have to wait forever to see a mental health professional, while there aren't nearly enough, while inpatient care can cost $35,000 for a month for 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who don't have resources to do that. We have found that we can help a lot of people with talking about changing the way that we think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very simple phrase, but a lot of times the way that we think about things has a lot to do of why we get into trouble, why we get into situations, why we get into certain things, why we do things where we look back the next day and go, why did I do that?
Mm-hmm.
Why did I do this silly, dangerous thing? And, maybe I'm interfacing with law enforcement at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And things, I always say all things with addiction start with honesty. Because most people who have use problems, we're sneaky. We
Mm-hmm.
are very good at sneaking around and telling stories and putting on a happy face and not being honest with others. And most importantly, not being honest with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk to somebody here, that's the only thing I ask of them, is that, this is between you and me. It's completely confidential. what I ask is that you be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And most people can do that. I sometimes you have some who can't, but it's that honesty.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then it comes. Sometimes it comes down to some things that you do not associate. I mean, it's easy to associate that. Have you had a mental health screening? Because maybe there's an imbalance somewhere, and maybe you're in, like in my case, I was self-medicating.
Mm-hmm.
I was medicating in a situation and using these substances. Uh, the substance I was using as a treatment for something else, which I call the why.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you do what you do?
Mm-hmm.
Why? And it turns out that treatment, alcohol, pain medication, opiates, et cetera, is not a very good treatment. It doesn't do a very good job, and it has lots of side effects.
Mm-hmm.
There's the chemical nature of it. A side effect could be being arrested for driving while intoxicated. It could involve a crime. If you're needing to buy drugs on the street, you constantly need money.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably frittered away your money because that becomes your life often. Um, so there's things to learn about who you are and to explore the why. The why may be that you have trouble communicating with your spouse and you're constantly fighting
Mm-hmm.
because you're built differently and you communicate differently.
Mm-hmm.
It may be any of a number of other reasons. Maybe we don't like who we are. That we have visions of what we think other people think of us,
Mm-hmm.
and it changes our behavior. Um, Sometimes there are anger issues. So, there's a variety of different things that can lead you to a spot where I always say you want to hit the pause button.
Mm.
You don't know what's going on. You don't necessarily know how to solve something,
Yeah.
but you know how to make it stop temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
And we get very good at that. And then the problem is we're constantly hitting the pause button and we're not addressing what's causing us to want to hit the pause button all
Yeah.
the time.
Mm. Wow, wow, wow. We've got quite much to share on this, and we thank you for everything that you shared with us here. And with a good job that you're doing, keep at it, because we need more of you who come back to get those who are in the pit that we've been in and who may not have an idea of how to get out. So you're doing
Mm-hmm.
a good job.
The first thing I think, and I don't know, we may be out of time here, but I will say that number one, addiction is not something to be embarrassed about.
Mm-hmm.
It's 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 a health problem,
Yeah.
and so we should, rather than looking to punish and things like that, we're looking for compassion, and we're looking for ways that, well, whatever it is that's going on, whatever that why is, what can we do as a society to help with that why? And there are ways to do, and we're one of them, I think, that can help people and have it not cost $35,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
We are able to help people. Now, there are people who need that service, they're at a level, they're maybe suffering from trauma, severe mental illness, schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder. I can't help with those. I don't have the expertise to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of people that I can help by sharing my story, by simply, men are not taught to talk. We don't talk about things.
Yeah, we keep quiet.
We're the strong silent type. Fix it yourself.
Yeah.
Take care of business and don't whine about it.
Uh-huh.
Well, of course, it's all, men need to talk just as much as women need to talk. So part of it is learning to do that. Part of it is for me to model behavior, that I'm not afraid to talk about these things that I've been through.
Mm.
Maybe if you hear something that's in common here, you'll know that we have a connection. A lot of times people just spend too much time by themselves. They don't connect with other people. And, isolation and boredom for a smart person it's a bad combination.
Mm.
So sometimes we talk about that. How do you meet friends as an adult? It's easy when you're in school.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a room with, if you're 6 years old, you're in primary school, you're in a room with 25 other 6 year olds, 7 hours a day, 5 days a week for 9 months of the year. You're
Mm-hmm.
going to find somebody there who you connect
Yeah,
with. As an
exactly.
adult, it's harder. And
Mm.
so there's a lot of things that are common sense things that are not necessarily expensive that aren't going to help everybody, but people would be surprised to the nth degree about how many people can be helped, and they aren't that far off. It doesn't have to take forever, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money.
Mm.
So
Well, that's good. Yeah. So we remind the people how to do that, because this thing is not something that you are just doing locally. It's something that you're doing all over, I guess.
absolutely,
And that's why we
we
are sharing your how you are able to
mhm.
be reached.
We have helped we people in person, but
Mm.
increasingly, and this a lot of this came during COVID, is that we do it just like you and I are doing here,
Mm-hmm.
and virtually.
Yeah.
And we have helped people in all 50 states, 4 provinces in Canada, England, France, New Zealand, and several other countries around the world. Um, and all you need to do to start that process is and there may be coaches in your neighborhood too, for all you know.
Yeah.
But you can go to wefaceittogether.org.
Mm-hmm.
wefaceittogether.org. It'll tell you everything about what we do. And if you want to find out more, all you have to do is to put your name and contact information. One of the things we do that we pride ourselves on is we get back to you right away. Within 24 to 48 hours, we have somebody talking to you. Because often it's, you're having a crisis. We finally have a crisis with addiction or mental health. And it's like, okay, I'm finally here. I need help right now. Great, wonderful. You called us. We can make an appointment and a doctor can see you in 2 months. Well, for 2 months, you're hanging on to the world by your fingernails. So one of the things that we do is to try to help people quickly and to give them that initial connection, because it's all about connection. It's all about other people. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yes, we are here for one another. That's why we have a
We have to
conversation.
be. We have to be.
Yeah, we have a conversation and we invite everybody who may be needing this conversation, this engagement, this connection, to just reach out, go out there and ask for help, because you don't have to suffer alone. Well, there
Ex-
is someone who can share his story, encourage you, hold your hand, and walk together with you and to recovery.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's Joe Talastos. Yeah, that's about it for today on this episode. And before we go, we would like you to leave us with a few words that we should always remember, something that we should never forget. What are those words?
Oh boy. Um, Connection is everything. Connecting with other human beings is everything. I believe we're all in this thing together, and help is out there, and you don't have to be embarrassed. You wouldn't be embarrassed if you had cancer. You wouldn't be embarrassed. You shouldn't be embarrassed about having an addiction. There's help there, and there's people ready. This is ready and waiting to help. So that's a mouthful, and it goes
Wow.
all over, but that's a lot, I guess. Connection.
Wow.
If there's one
Connection.
word, connection with other people. Connect.
Connect, connect, connect. Wow. Thank you very much, Joe, for that insight and for everything that you shared with us on this episode. We really appreciate you. Reminding the people once again to rush to www.wefaceit.together.org and connect with Joe. Connection is the word.
It is. Thank you,
Yeah,
Anthony. Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you to Joe. So this has been Now Tell Us. I've been your host, Anthony Moirore, and together with our guest today, Joe Talastos, we are saying connect, and bye for now. Yeah.